So the next session I'm just going to bring up is going to be around, click through. Oh, there we go. Is AI in credit collection. So I know we talked about AI a little bit already. We tried to sort of rein it in a little bit because I know it becomes a bit of a hot topic. You know, it's been a hot topic over a while, but it continues to be an area of huge focus, especially we're all being asked to do more with less, I suppose. We talked a bit about cost challenges there and handling data. So this we're really going to talk about what we've seen this year, what's actually happening in the world of AI and in collections, and some of the things we were talking about, like how can we really use it as a tool. And so joining me on stage, we've got Guy Statter from Waterbuck. We've got Richard Grinham from COEO, and Sarah Naylor from Duke. So thanks very much. And Guy, thank you very much for stepping in at the last minute. It was meant to be Eddie was going to be here, Eddie Harrison, but he unfortunately can't be here today. So for reasons. So thanks very much for stepping in. So as I say, I mean we've all talked a lot about AI over the last little while, and I suppose the burning question and the question that we always have is. What are the case studies? And we heard some before. I mean, it's like where we think it can be used, and this is ever evolving. But what have you kind of seen? And I suppose Richard, I'll probably come to you first because you have the luxury of sitting at the end. So what are some of the case studies or useful case studies you've kind of seen from an AI point of view where you think it can practically be used in a business?
Yeah. So AI for us has been very much a co-piloting tool. So it's taking out some of the rigor for repetitive, ongoing tasks or tasks that you can't facilitate in bulk. So quality assurance is a big one for us. Quality assuring 100% of our customer contact across all channels. Historically, as I'm sure has been the case across everyone in this room at certain points, you're marking a very small percentage of whatever your customer interactions are with your contact centre. And as long as you're careful around things like PII and some of the approaches around security, there's nothing to say you can't mark the other 98% of your interactions because those customers, their journey is just as important. So we've very much been utilising it in a co-pilot basis. Some of the guys in the previous panel were talking about chatbots. We are using it in the chatbot space for kind of what is a very black and white answer. So if a customer says, basic terms, can I pay now? Where can I pay? Well, I don't want that to have to wait for an agent. I can give them that response. It's a pretty base standard response and run through. And then alongside that, other pieces around engagement and RCS responses and all those kind of good things. So yeah, it's for us a pretty broad-ranging focus point, but it's never there to replace the human aspect. It's only there to kind of help the human understanding, the human decision-making just improve and become better.
Yeah, I mean, and Sarah, what's your kind of view in terms of like you're part of the industry, I suppose. I mean, where do you sort of like see it being used, or where it can be used to my greatest advantage?
Sure. Well, it kind of follows on nicely actually from the previous conversation about maximising engagement and bots. We've been on a journey with AI for 5 years now, since 2020, and predominantly after the rise of COVID, we saw that there was a huge shift towards digital engagement. Something which I talked about a couple of weeks back of the Amazon and Uber effect, where people they want their services now, and they want contacts for everything now and at a time that's convenient to them. So we see that there's a huge case for chatbots, similar to what Richard was saying, but we've taken it that step further, where it's not just kind of a facts and questions kind of service. It actually engages. It's conversational AI, using natural language processing in order to understand what the individual wants, to identify vulnerability, and to help them with managing their debt during 24/7 hours of a day. There's a huge, as I say, demand now for people contacting outside of your standard operating hours, and for us that's a real key. Using AI is the best way for us to be accessible and engage with our customers. One other thing that we've used, so that's one side where we've used AI mainly for customer service. The second part is in terms of operational efficiencies. So we're an enforcement company, so we have enforcement agents that go out to people's homes, and in order to ensure that they're doing that efficiently, we've used AI to look at previous case history and to say, right, okay, this debtor, because that's what we call them in that side, this debtor's previously paid, engaged with an agent at their home on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So we've had a new case for them now, so we're going to schedule that for that agent on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock because we know that had success last time. And then the opposite, they didn't get engagement on this day, so we won't schedule it for there, and so on. It's about how we can use that to, A, take away time for our agents so that they're just focusing on the job at hand, not having to do administration, but also how we can get the best outcome for our clients and achieve their KPIs.
Okay. And Guy, I mean, you've been, seeing a lot of businesses actually across the industry. I mean, what's your kind of view in terms of the best use cases you kind of see in terms of that, and where do you think it's bubbling to as well? Because we're on a journey with it rather than sort of being a point in time.
So for me, content. Funny enough, I'm co-founder of a new AI business in the vulnerability space, and AI is amazing at handling huge amounts of content in real time, and then using it to come to different results for different things. So I think that is a pretty safe area for people to play in. You can use AI to just analyze huge amounts of content and curate that content very, very quickly in multiple languages and then serve it in multiple ways. You still need to make sure there's some checks and balances, as we've seen. There's been some problems where people haven't checked things and it's been problematic. But that is, for me, it's just an absolute game changer. Where things are bubbling, to describe it, I think we mentioned earlier about actual frontline services, chatbot, voice chatbots. I think the Mega AI example was mentioned. And I heard that for the first time 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was a little bit uncomfortable with it. But then I was like, actually, that's just me, because I'm a 48-year-old bloke who's uncomfortable with stuff. I talked to my kids about it, and they were like, yeah, we'd have loved that. So I do think when we talked earlier about different channels for different users, that sort of live chatbot conversation, I think, will come through, but it just needs to be monitored really carefully, because if my mum would have just put the phone down, for example. I might have given it a go and it's a bit uncomfortable. So I think I'm being a bit lazy there with the sort of age stereotype, but that is certainly going to be a new serious channel for us all to explore.
Is that a channel for us as well to think through? I mean, it's kind of like the marketing channel, which is you're not selling to yourself, you're selling to everyone who's out there. Not everyone's like us as individuals. I mean, we're all different, right? Is that a challenge that we're going to have when we're thinking about engagement? I mean, even in the last session, we talked about the average reading age being 7. If you send me something that's average reading age of 7, I might not like it, right? So I might want to have something that shows me more information on the page. Is that a challenge? Is that something we're going to have to increasingly challenge ourselves with? I mean, Richard, you're sort of like nodding at the end now. I mean, do we have to put ourselves in the frame of the customer like we always would? And is AI a theme of that as well, right? Is that also a theme with AI?
I think so, and I think AI... Sorry.
You go.
I think that's absolutely the case, and I think we've got to be a little bit careful about just classifying people. I was at a different event, and someone said that most people who are vulnerable have an average of 6.4 vulnerabilities. I don't know where you get the 0.4 from, but I get the point. So if we're talking about channel of choice, that channel of choice might vary on a daily or an hourly basis, as might for example, their mental health. So where AI can come in quite handy is it can listen, it can pick up keywords, you can do sentiment analysis with it, albeit the level of success is still to be decided. So I think there's an element of channel of choice, message of choice, and it is all within the AI capability, but it needs to be proven, and it still needs to have controls around it, obviously, otherwise there's going to be problems, and there's going to be someone spoken to in the wrong way by a bot, and it's going to cause problems and so on.
I mean, Richard, what's your kind of view around, I suppose, the mindset in particular? And I think even just what Guy, you were just saying, we might have different mindsets even with the same individual, right? So, catch me on a Friday night or over the weekend, it might be different than it's sort of Monday morning as well, those sort of things.
I mean, I'm a lot looser with my money on a Friday night than I am any other time of the year. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I think it's not pigeonholing some. We've all talked about personas in the office, and we can make guesstimates of what a customer's persona is going to be. But actually, the ultimate outcome is you just need to treat everyone as individuals. Like it, whether you're between 30 and 40 and you're this demographic, actually, it doesn't mean to say we're digital first, but it doesn't mean you're digitally literate. Or it doesn't mean that on a Thursday night you're able to take a phone call because you're at home. It's different situations throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the entire life cycle of an account being with you. And what I find really interesting from an AI perspective is that it's only there to support what's an existing human team, certainly within COEO. So for the AI perspective, we're monitoring that the right outcomes were achieved for customers, and they're being given back to our call center agents within 25 seconds of them hanging up the phone. So if they can then take that feedback on board or those observations on board to improve the next call and the next call and the next call, it's not just helping the customers that have had a good experience within COEO, but it's helping the good customers that have shortly going to have a debt that's being chased by Lau or by Arden or by DRA. And if they have a good experience with all those guys, hopefully the next time the account comes to us, they're also willing to engage and have an honest and open conversation about their situation, whether that's through the phone, whether that's through a bot. That's why I think having that customer experience side of AI is really important for us to make sure that you're delivering on what you're promising for a customer, and that could be different at every stage throughout that communication process.
I mean, Sarah, do you sort of see that in terms of, AI becomes an enabler for us to have greater degrees of customization? I mean, even down to the idea of it being intra single person customization, it was kind of interesting as well, right? So does AI become an enabler for us to design hyper personalization?
Yeah, and if we look at the people that are in the room here today, in 20 years, it's going to be a new generation. So you also is a good user case for looking at AI now and getting it ready for the next generation of people that we're going to be, our customers that we're going to be communicating with. We've seen, you mentioned about sentiment analysis, and maybe there's not a great case for whether or not that works. We've certainly seen that it works for us. And actually, our experience, particularly when collecting council tax, is that vulnerable debtors don't want to speak to us on the phone. They always want to speak to us indirectly because of it links back to quite a lot of conversations actually that have been mentioned today. Perception. There's a bad perception of bailiffs. And we're fighting that daily within our industry and trying to convert them and say, actually, we're here to help you. Part of implementing AI is the way that we all say, actually, the service is here. We want to engage with you. We want to get you on board and let's sort out your situation. So I think it's, you can use sentiment, to go back to your question, you can use sentiment analysis to understand perhaps the type of customer that you're speaking to, and then you can use it to respond. The key bit for chatbots is that it needs to have an escalation route out, always. And you can't rush into it for the reason, this is why it took us 2 years to design, develop, and then launch, because as soon as someone has a bad experience on that, they won't go back to that channel. And it's the same for any channel that we have. If they're emailing and it's particularly slow, they won't use that channel again, or they'll be hesitant to do so. So, whichever way you use AI, and if you're going down the bot solution, it needs to be tested all the time. There needs to be quality processes included so that you can go in and test it. Do some, what is it called when you, mystery shopper exercises, as well as just checking the CSAT scores at the end of it. But our experience has been that resolution time has reduced and more customers are happy with their response. They're managing their debts out of hours without having to speak to someone. And then when they do need to, they're able to escalate it outwards. So I think it helps with that personalised service, definitely.
That escalation kind of principle is kind of good. We always remember the days of IVRs, which you just went round and round in circles. I mean, it's kind of the same, isn't it? But making sure we have that layered in with AI as well, AI journeys.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, Guy, how far do you think we can realistically push AI in terms of like comms and communication, customer engagement and communications?
So I got a quite interesting question from somebody in the charity sector, which was, can AI, when it's doing call monitoring, tell if someone's drunk or otherwise impaired? And my honest answer was, I guess it depends. If you build a model to look for that, then it probably could, but you'd have to be really careful that you weren't mistaking drunkenness or whatever else it might be for some other type of impairment. But all of those things are possible if you build the models in the right way against the right data sets that are wide enough and extensive enough, and you still contain, you still have a level of control and management over what it is you're looking for. So it really is limitless, but with the caveats of there is enough data and enough testing to make sure it can work. And if you're only thinking about it now, then don't necessarily expect to have something live in a few months, or if you have, it's because someone else has already built it and you're just borrowing it anyway. But if it's brand new, you've still got to take time over. So you said about a couple of years. That feels about right for some important things that are going on. So, yeah. But
it sounds like, I mean, we're also only just starting to make use of some of the data we've got. So, as an example, I knew someone who was looking at electricity usage, and his electricity usage, and looking at that at a very fine level, and then saying, well, is that person vulnerable because they turn on, they've fallen over, they turn on their kettle at a different time. And that's just within one dimension, right? And we get into calls, and we've got all this extra dimension, you get all these extra indicators. And I suppose the danger there is you have false positives. And I suppose, how do we as businesses, because this is going to come at us, how do we now react to that and make sure we're being sensible in how we interact with customers? And Richard, I'll ask you at the end around how would you think about that?
So we're thinking about it all the time. I think if you're using any sort of AI, to Sarah's point, and Guy, I know you'd agree with this as well, but you've got to be doing quality assurance on all the processes you're using. The fact we use AI in a QA process quite regularly, you're still quality assuring that with an agent, with a team behind it, and yeah, you still only marking 2% of your interactions, but it's there. Alongside that, you also then get into, so we have bots that do auto responses, and yes, there's sentiment analysis in there. It's quite a challenge to work out if someone's drunk on a Friday night, beyond the fact that it's a little bit, they're willing to spend a bit more money, like I am, because I've had a drink. But also, unless it's incomprehensible, it doesn't make any sense. It's spelling errors all over the place. Where it does come in is quite an interesting model, and Chris, you asked a question a minute ago. I've heard a few fake agents or AI agents and those sorts of things. I think there's probably a place that will end up in for overflow, and I'm sorry, our contact centre is full. You'll be waiting for 25 minutes to get your call answered, but if you press 1, you can speak to an AI agent to see if they can help you. I think that might be a solution that people go through in the future. So you're almost opting into it as opposed to opting out of it. So an exclusion in as opposed to an inclusion out. And all of those sorts of facets of activity have to be checked regularly, and whether that's in quality assurance, making sure the PPI is good, or PII is good, sorry, and it's being redacted effectively. If it's in virtual agent, it's not taking bias. It's able to respond in different languages, which my French is not very good, but I can get by if I'm on holiday. I'm not sure I could discuss my debt with a French debt collection agency. But having all of those sorts of facets in a contact centre make it just so much more powerful. And that's not to say that an agent can't get a prescribed answer if it's not so black and white, and it doesn't mean to say that an agent can't take control when vulnerability is raised, but if it's just a basic question, why not just give that customer what they want straight away? It's that immediate response that Sarah was talking about earlier, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, and I suppose, just as you're talking there, I was thinking about how we're all getting bombarded as well by all these different types, flavours of AI that are coming through as well. I mean, it's almost like, there's been a lot of talk about it. Everyone's put AI after their name, those kind of things, and we're all getting a lot of calls saying, like, this will change the world. How do we best think around filtering through that in terms of which things are really going to add benefit to the business versus not? because it just feels like we might get 30 emails a day offering wonderful things like translation services as an example, or it might be, voice services, it might be analytics services. How do we filter down to decide, well, this is going to add value for my business? I mean, how do we sort of filter that noise out? I mean, Sarah, what's your kind of view on that?
It depends what the strategy of the business is and what your goals for that year are. Have you got particular issues with engaging with a group of customers, or is your CSAT score's not very good? It is easy to get overwhelmed, as you say, by all the different terms of AI and different processes that there are. But you have to stay on your own journey of what it is that you wanted to achieve in the first place. So for us, the need was, well, as I say, post-COVID, everyone now want to access services or pay services at a time that suits them and in a method that suits them. And we've actually moved towards digital live chat, as I say. That kind of was a really popular route for us and has been for the last 10 years. So actually we saw more people wanted to do that out of hours, so a chatbot was the need for that. Again, we took our time to build it, and the benefit of us not taking an off-the-shelf product and designing our own meant that actually it can evolve as technology does and demand changes. So, we launched it in 2022. This year we evolved it into a virtual assistant. So that now means that the Duke, which is the name of our bot, also proactively goes out to our customers, to our debtors, where they've engaged with the bot or via email and said that they wanted to make a payment, or that they wanted to discuss their account, but then they've dropped off, as sometimes people do. It will proactively chase them and say, hey, like my example is always when you do online shopping and you put something in your basket and you think, oh, I'll get that tomorrow. You get that email that says, hey, you've forgotten something, do you want to continue making your payment? Similar to that, these nudge tactics, which is very common and people come to expect it now, that's kind of where it's moving into for us, and that was always our plan. We haven't just picked that up along the way because it's fashionable now. It's just you have to map out what your long-term journey is for using AI, and don't get distracted by some of the nice things that are going on, because you'll then end up with doing so much and nothing will be effective. You've got to really hone in on the results, checking the quality, as we keep going back to, and saying, actually, is this achieving what we set out for in the first place? If not, okay, maybe we'll look elsewhere, but you've really got to take the time to complete what you started.
Yeah, so it's being sort of like results and business-led in terms of what you're going after, right? So, I mean, and Guy, I suppose, and particularly in your role now, I suppose, there's a balance there between what you actually need to do and what you're paying money to essentially have done, either through developing in-house or going to a third party. But then there's also what's coming down the road in terms of horizon. I mean, what's your recommendation around how to stay ahead of what's coming down the pipe? I mean, I know a couple of years ago we were on the same stage, I think, in Manchester, talking about the metaverse. I think it was. We didn't come to anything, but staying ahead in terms of what might come, and only 10% of those might come through, but you keep your eye ahead of it, your eyes on it, to stay ahead.
Yeah, I do think you still need to be goal-oriented, and obviously we're all here, for working on behalf of business or multiple businesses, in the case of you and I, Chris, but ultimately we have goals that we need to reach, and so I think you have to keep an eye on the technology that is impacting that, and when we're in collections and credit, that's pretty much everything that's to do with customer engagement, and also anything that impacts people in and around vulnerability. And I mean, I think most of us just keep an eye on a whole raft of things, whether it's technology, whether it's regulation, and so on. But sometimes I think it's worth just looking a bit beyond the natural places that you would normally look and just see what might be happening in other industries like retail, particularly, but even in like academia, because you just don't know where the next thing might be coming from. Within AI, I think there's going to be a consolidation. I think there may be some amazing new tech that comes, but I don't know what it is. I think what's more likely is people just get more and more comfortable with more things within AI. We've talked already about a number of different ones. I think people using, as I mentioned earlier about content, I think people now are pretty happy for AI to curate content. So, if you, for example, you were building, a new research area or something like that, you'd probably use AI to pull all the information from all the different sources that you need. I'm not saying that's relevant to this industry. So yeah, I guess to answer the question and to like get out of answering the question is, I'm not sure where it's coming from exactly, but I just think we just need to keep an eye out in more than just our little world, because it could come from anywhere.
So other sectors like, I think
absolutely.
the marketing was mentioned earlier, which is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting kind of sector.
Definitely, yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, and just to add to that, one of the, similar to what Sarah was saying, we developed our own AI. We haven't bought anything off the shelf for quality assurance or virtual agent, and the reason being is that we wanted it trained with FCA rules behind it. So you buy a virtual agent off a shelf, or you buy a quality assurance tool off the shelf, and it's missing some of that regulatory requirement. But one of the things that drove onto was looking at external markets about what we could do better. So I'm not sure who mentioned it on the last panel. We brought up TikTok, and I think 20% of people put their hand up in this room. It was an area that we had very limited exposure in. COEO didn't have a TikTok. We do now. But it's a process for answering questions. So what we were finding was that more and more customers, particularly in the younger demographic, and I'm generalising there, but they were TikTok searching, who are COEO, are they going to take my house? And they were getting a response from an influencer that wasn't us. So we weren't in control of the narrative. So we brought that in and brought in some video responses to those sorts of areas. And I think, although I'm sort of deviating from AI, but what that then led to was where else could we use processes that are working very well in other sectors to just enhance our services. And one of those that we picked up was Apple's AI-based FAQ page. So I think everyone's got a page. We buy debt, we're a DCA as well, but also a purchaser. And you get an FAQ, what does it mean if COEO have acquired my debt? And again, are they going to take my house? Will they litigate on me? Am I going to lose my kids and my dog? We've all got those pages that have the top 10 questions, but actually, if someone wants to just type a question that they've got on our website, it gives them a response. Whether it's correct or not, because it could have multiple stages and those sorts of things, they can get flagged by our bot and have a conversation with an agent. But it just gives them those free format support options that people want. I might say, where do I pay? Someone else might say, I want to get rid of this debt. Another person might say, I've got the money for this. They all mean the same thing, but they're not necessarily what you'd find if you Googled about it.
Yeah. I mean, are we sort of at risk of becoming over-reliant on AI? We talk about how it's then being put in, and we're using it to replace particular processes. Do you think are we still at danger of sort of just taking a step back around it becoming over-reliant? Do you think there's danger of that, where it sort of like takes over? I mean, it's interesting just how much the conversation's changed, even since we've been doing these over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, we would all be saying, we've got to have an agent on the call, right? Then nothing's changed between here and then. The models maybe have got more sophisticated, but now we're all accepting. We're talking about having it on websites. We're talking about those kind of things. I mean, are we at danger of becoming over-reliant, do you think, as we become more comfortable?
I think it's about knowing who your customers are, and at least for us and in our industry, it's a very small percentage of customers that are vulnerable. So the majority are there to pay, want to know more about the debt, want to know how they can pay. So AI is useful in that for those proportion of cases. You still need people, absolutely. You still need a human touch for those cases where it needs to be escalated, or where people want to understand more, they need support, they need access to benefits, they need whatever else it is. That requires people. So I don't think we should ever really use AI to replace people, but I think, as we've kind of alluded to on different sessions, it's there to give the immediate answers to people, and to ensure that those that need the support actually get directly into a person. And they've got a fast-track route to that, because everyone else that's just asking questions what's a reference number, what hours have you got, or what's your contact methods, your payment methods, and so on, they get a quick answer. So the people in the back office are available for those that need 10, 15, 20 minutes on a call.
Yeah, it's about taking the noise out so you can get to people as quick as possible. I mean, one of the conversations that came up recently was around training, right, and training of the next generation coming through, and you mentioned the next generation. And as AI becomes more prevalent and we end up using it to basically to replace some of the jobs we would do and some of the entry-level jobs, are we losing an element of being able to train the next sort of generation coming through with some of the same skills that we would learn? Or is that something we don't need to worry about because AI will always be there?
So I heard yesterday about an organisation, massive call centre organisation, who is using AI to train their agents, and they can run 50 agents through basic training with no trainer. And again, being a 48-year-old bloke, I was a bit scared by that, but apparently in the early stages it's going really well. I think you can train all of the sort of the basic functions. If the information is there, that's what you can do, but you can't train empathy, and you never will be able to train empathy. And when we're talking about the chatbots, there was always, in the journeys I've seen, there's always an escalation point, and that escalation point is always to a human. And there is also some listening in there, so that if somebody is crying, it goes straight to a person, for example. So I think the next generation will expect elements of the training to contain AI, but I think taking the grizzled old veteran, for want of a better phrase, out is very dangerous.
But I suppose it's if you've got if the only job you're doing within collections is that super difficult call where you're dealing with potential harm, you're sort of really thrown in at the deep end. I mean, that's your first call you're going to be doing. I mean, how do we? And whereas before you would have had someone who might have had 10 years worth of experience taking easy calls, taking payments, and now they're just sort of thrown in at the deep end. I mean, how should we think about that? Because the skill sets might not be quite the same, but we don't have a path for them to grow up through the organisations, right? I mean, Richard, what's your kind of view on that? I mean, it's maybe not something we have to worry about now, but in 10 years' time, it might be something.
Yeah, perhaps. I think the way, and going back to what Guy was saying in the last question, but you can train certain aspects of a role to somebody using AI or a macro and whatever it might be to try and reduce the stress on a training team or an L&D team. Where I think the AI is really helpful is around activity post-call. We've been talking for 35 minutes? Probably feels like 3 hours to you guys out there, but we've been talking for 35 minutes. I probably can't tell you what the first question was that you asked me. And if we've got an agent on the phone that has had, we talk about first contact resolution, so we don't time how long someone's on the phone. So if they're on the phone for 35 minutes, they've identified vulnerability, they've identified this, they've identified that. We transcribe the call, get it on the notes, but actually are we certain that they've ticked every box they should have done as a result of that? Because the customer gave a new telephone number at the beginning. Did that get in the system? The customer mentioned an expression of dissatisfaction or a complaint reason as well as vulnerability, and did that go in the right place? And I think those sorts of uses for AI are going to be really important to just flag that there might have been something missed, rather than it's sort of taking that control away from the agent. I think it's there as a bit of a sieve over the top to say, did the right outcome get achieved, and was the system updated accurately? Was a new telephone number gathered? Was the forbearance added to the account? Was it the same length that was agreed on the phone? Was the payment plan set up properly? All those kind of things I think can help with AI, but I don't think it ever replaces the human interaction and their decision-making process themselves.
If I can just jump in on that, I think I totally agree, but just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, I think the use of AI, and as we say now, because it cuts out that those easy conversations, there's definitely, for the new generation, their skill set needs to be a lot higher than entry level for what was 10 years ago, maybe even now. And I think it'll be a lot sooner. I think it'll be in the next couple of years we'll start to see that. But then you make the great point, Richard, that actually, we need more training. I would say that we need training from people. That would be my personal view, that it's still great to have that classroom training with people, and that level of training needs to be a touch higher. But we can then use AI for our admin processes to ensure that the consistency across all the output, if that makes sense. So we train them more at that entry level so that their skills are higher, they've got more competency, but then we also implement AI to say, actually, we'll help you with your wrap-up of the call. We'll make sure that if you're on the call for 30 minutes, it's transcribing it and it's taking out all the information so that they can just really focus on the real tough parts of the conversations.
So although AI makes it difficult, it actually becomes part of the solution as well to actually up the skill sets, right, as well. One of the other topics that came up was around model consistency and transparency within using AI, and particularly if people are using online kind of models, that they can actually change. So if you type the difference between just using ChatGPT as an example between 4 mini and 4.0 as an example will give you the same prompt will give you different answers. How important is that for particularly financial services in terms of like transparency and I suppose running say your own models and that change development cycle, those kind of things? I mean, how do we need to think about that? I mean, Guy, I don't know if you had a perspective on that, because I know the other two guys you'd sort of built your own for what
we're the same. Jim and myself are involved in a business called Help Hub, which we're launching soon, and obviously we built that on our own models as well. I guess the simple answer is, as I said earlier, it's about breadth of data, it's about testing, and it's also about transparency. So what are we doing and why? And if there is an issue or something that we notice, don't necessarily cancel the whole program, just go and investigate it really, really quickly. And we rely on a team of people doing that ourselves, and it's going quite well. And we're not really ever releasing things. Well, we haven't released anything yet because it's a new company, but those things won't be released even onto the main platform until they've been rigorously tested. However, something could come up that we never saw coming, and that caused a problem. But at least we will be able to go back and transparently see why this might have happened. And I guess the reasons that we've seen very high-profile issues before is that historically certain models in certain situations have been built by the same sorts of people. Sort of middle-aged white guys in California being one of those. So I think there is an element of making sure that the people that are building and checking your models have as broad a perspective as possible. And we're working in the vulnerability space, so we're naturally bringing in people from all sorts of different sectors. I think we're up to 15 sectors that we're sort of talking to and getting advice from, everything from local charities through to big banks and everything in between across all sectors. But we'll still have missed something along the way, but hopefully the model will catch up. Yeah. But yeah, it's not easy. I
mean, we're inventing new jobs as we're actually on the stage, which is like AI model checker. Seems like a new one. Richard, I mean, what's your kind of? I know because you guys built your own as well. I think it's like.
Yeah, we built our own, and we've actually opened a tech business alongside COEO to we found some real benefit in what we're doing internally with it, so we're going to launch it to market in July. Those of you that are at our event in March would have heard that. So we're on that journey. But what we found really interesting is that I'm probably one of the better people to lead on it because I was pessimistic about how much it could achieve in the first place. So I sort of, if you're telling a customer they're talking to a bot, they're just going to press 1 to go to an agent. That was because that's what I would do. But actually, them having that immediate response from a bot and still having the option to go to an agent afterwards, they don't click it because they're getting the right answer. So it's answering 78% of our interactions digitally now, and answering them with the customer exiting with a yes, this is giving me the right answer, kind of RCS box at the bottom within 3 interactions. And it's continually improving. But there's always going to be that grey area over the top where immediately they mention a vulnerable term or whatever it is. And in those circumstances, we don't allow the bot to respond. It goes straight through to a team. They have a kind of a micro template that it's the bot sort of said, I think this is what you want to respond with, but you might want to tweak it or check it or whatever. And it responds, or it will automatically go, oh, okay, would you like us to give you a quick call and we can discuss this further? Whatever those circumstances are. What I was probably not appreciating was that actually those interactions being quick and swift and accurate means they don't want to talk to an agent. It's 8 o'clock and they're watching EastEnders if it starts at 8 o'clock. and they are interacting with us digitally on the sofa. They don't want their husband, their wife, their kids, their family to realise that's what they were doing. They can have a very discreet conversation with us, then get the answer straight away. They can put their phone down and they can carry on with what they're doing with the rest of their lives, because they want the intrusion to be as limiting on their lives, and they want it as quickly as possible so they can put the phone down and get away from it. So that's where we designed our processes from, and it was always with that in mind. Was the only way it's going to hit all of these benchmarking criteria, similar to what you were saying, Sarah and Guy, is if we build it ourselves, and it therefore hits what we're expecting of what we put in front of people. We're not having to put a square peg in a round hole, those kind of things.
So in this section here, we talked a lot about AI communications, AI discussions, be it voice AI, be it messaging AI, those kind of things, or, message summarization. What we haven't really talked about, I suppose, is process automation, which used to be RPA, but also AI agents as well. So that was another theme that was kind of, probably 6 months ago, was really sort of like being promoted, I suppose, which is around sort of like automating processes, more intelligent RPA to a certain extent. That's still out there where firms are basically, particularly legacy systems, trying to fix broken processes. Is there a danger, though, that by using things like AI agents, it becomes a band-aid for just bad processes just carrying on, a bit like throwing agents at the problem would be, to quote? Guy, what's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, so I think the safest place to play with AI is still back office. So we've all talked a lot about front office and customer communications, and there's lots to be said for it, but actually you can use AI to completely revolutionize processes and move them around. I think it is like RPA on speed, for want of a better phrase, but I've seen it used very successfully in things like mortgage application processing, which is a still very tortuous process for many people, but actually some brave souls are actually really using AI to really change that process for the better, and cutting bits of processes out if the customer meets certain criteria, and therefore not having them fill in an extra 5 reams of, well, not 5 reams of paper, but 5 screens or whatever it is of data, because actually there's a way of populating it and just getting them to check it, or even getting the AI to check it, and so on and so forth. So I do think that, I guess AI is moving across all fronts, but I say definitely safest in the back office. And if you have got legacy processes that are hard to change, AI can come in and change them. But you have to have the mindset of wanting to do that. And if you're set in your ways, you're probably not going to want to engage with AI anyway, which is a shame. But then you'll eventually be obsolete. So,
And I suppose just with that, the human in the loop also becomes relevant as well. Although we talk about it, human in the loop, in terms of like customer communication, actually, if you've got an AI agent deciding to charge off an account, does there still need to be human in the loop to make sure that that's actually correct? And at what point do you not have it in the loop to then allow it to go through, right? So there's areas of greyness, right? Because you're not getting the benefit unless you're automating the process. I mean,
I'll just quickly take that one again. So we talk about that as happy path. So if the circumstances for a write-off meet a standard process, then actually that could be fully automated, no problem at all. I think where it gets more complicated is the non-happy path stuff, and that's where you probably need oversight. But even then, what you can do is you can create a page where AI will present the most relevant things for, say, an underwriter or case handler or whatever to look at, rather than just, here's all the data, work through it yourself. And I think that, again, is, someone earlier talked about agent augmentation. That's a really great sort of agent augmentation use of AI. And it can work in real time. So actually, we talked about QA and whatever, you could be on the phone with a customer discussing something, or somebody else could be, and a different person could be getting that information coming through and making the decision, because for whatever reason, it's a non-happy path case, for whatever that might be. So I think every case can be touched by AI in most situations, particularly some more back office type assessment things, but you obviously still need the people there just to act on the information, particularly if it's complicated.
Yeah. I mean, the FCA has come out and saying that they're supporting the use of AI. They've got their sandbox, I think, that's out there. But I think they said something recently saying about they're being supportive of it, but with suitable controls around transparency and those kind of things. I mean, as an industry, I suppose, how do you think we should leverage that in terms of embedding this, particularly in financial services kind of processes? Because we've always taken the view around, like, we're a regulated industry, you've got to be super careful. However, it feels like there's a little bit of a chink of light from the FCA to say, well, look, there's a bit of future in this because it's a way of actually handling volumes and getting greater degrees of hyper-personalisation, really, I think is.
So we've applied to be part of the FCA AI sandbox process through COEO, because we're really clever in coming up with good company names. So it's COEO AI, say COEO. You can thank our marketing team when you hear all about it. I think the process we found so far is that they've been really supportive of the activity, and I think it's similar to, I know we all bash the FCA at times and different people and different processes and regulation coming out and being ambiguous, but actually it's similar to whenever you've had the FCA or an external audit come into your company. It's as long as you can justify with a good thought process behind it why you've made the decision to apply something, and you know that your quality control checking it over the top, or you've got agents that are coming out with the same answer, and those sorts of things, they're pretty open to it right now. And if you're building AI or you're implementing it within your business or you're making changes to something off the shelf, have a think about the FCA's sandbox, because if you're regulated, it's a great way of, you know, temperature checking that what you're going through independently is right. So we all put processes in place, and we have, similar to what Sarah was touching on earlier, but you go through, and this customer more often engages with an email. So a letter's due. I'm not going to not send the letter. I'm still going to send it, or I've still got a telephone call to make, but I'll drop them an email as well at the same time. Oh, they're a new customer and they've set up a brand new payment plan. Well, it's due tomorrow, the first instalment. So I'll just give them an RCS nudge to be, do you remember you've set up your payment plan? You owe me £30 a month and it starts tomorrow. They click yes and they don't hear anything. Or no, we can have a proactive conversation. And all of these AI tools that we're building over the top and you can use within the sandbox is just going to help you ensure you're hitting those FCA metrics. And if you're not, helping guide them to reviewing and providing transparent regulations over what you can use in the AI space for automation. So I think there's only benefits to being part of it, if I'm honest.
And Sarah, I suppose, do you think where AI is going to change the way we interact with customers? So we talked a bit about quality monitoring before, or being able to interact with people differently. Do you think where the agents or the field agents are going to ask different questions because they know they're being monitored, because then that data can be captured? Or do you think almost like, will there be almost like that feedback loop, which is because we got AI, it allows us to gather extra information, so we might present cases slightly differently?
I'm not sure I quite follow with the question.
So, for example, if you're on a call, which is, if you're on a call, let's say it's been recorded on Teams, you might want to say, well, look, I think you might be vulnerable, because vulnerable then gets flagged in the notes, and then that goes through, and that then creates a flag on the system. And I wouldn't have said that normally, but now I know that I've got this support and case management support, so reviews sitting in the background. It allows me to almost like create flags and create automation, but it changes the way I fundamentally interact with customers.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So in terms of if there's if we use an AI to kind of transcribe those notes or to make sure that the next reminder or process is implemented, probably yes. I mean, that's not a process that we're using in terms of Copilot or any kind of adaptation of that with regards to our agents on the phone. But certainly I can see that would be a natural process for our agents to do in order to make sure that they're hitting their brief, and perhaps that would be something that would then be built into their new KPIs for their quality audits, because there is still an onus on your agents as you're answering a call, or whether that's on the phone or on the doorstep, to be asking certain questions. And that's where I think there needs to be the balance between people and technology. We can't rely on the technology to do it all. It's there as an assistant to capture the details, but we have to get those details in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I suppose the point there becomes sort of embedded, where you can't tell the difference between the person and the technology, and it becomes one, doesn't it? Because we work sort of in symbiosis to it. I mean, Guy, what's your kind of view on that? Do you think we'll see process changes as a result of AI because it's given us new capabilities? We'll be able to do new things.
Yeah, I do. I think people should feel a bit safer. So, you know, the example that we were given to kind of keep an eye out for is in quality assurance, the word cancer had been tagged as something, but the word chemo hadn't. And so someone mentioned that they were at chemo, and then nothing happened. They just sailed through, and it got missed as a cancer case. Partly because the agent was busy, and to Rich's point earlier, 30-minute call, they just missed it, right? And that's fine, but it still wasn't picked up because the bot was listening for cancer, not for chemo. So, but if it was a good AI and it had been proven, then the agent should just feel a bit more relaxed because they're not having to write every single piece of information that might be relevant now. It's kind of catching it for them. So I'm hoping that's going to be the way it's going to evolve. And so hopefully, it will just aid better conversations, and it might will start prompting certain questions in certain scenarios. Who knows? But it will certainly now it can help with. I think someone talked about in an earlier session. placing the type of call. Basically, getting it to the right agent, the right time, the right circumstances. All that stuff's there now. So, I'm not saying everyone's using it, but that stuff's there now. So I'm hoping it will just make things better. But it will, like we were talking about, field services. It should enable, a field agent to just have better conversations, and they're on the front line, literally sat down with that person face to face. But if they've got, a lot of good information that's been fed through to them, and then they're capturing that information either through a call recording or something, they can maybe get that person the help they need there and then. Because in the previous example, actually, do you know what? There's someone who can help you better with whatever the cancer is, whatever the signposting is for that. So, I think it will be an improvement. Yeah.
Can I just add to that, if that's all right? And I suppose for me, I'm a bit in a privileged position because the tools we're using, virtual agent, excluding a bit for QA, for example, on calls, is after the fact. So, and we've topped and bottomed quite a lot of the discussions about, well, could chemo comes up or cancer comes up, can it, big red button, make sure you put this on vulnerable. Actually, that derails the conversation when we've had a look at those sorts of processes. It's far better to just train your agents properly, to have a good conversation, and just help them meander the outcome afterwards. So as long as they're focused on one thing, they're not having to make a load of notes. The AI over the top is transcribing the call. It's giving them the kind of salient points afterwards. That's a much better outcome. And for the agent to then get some feedback to say, oh, you spoke over that customer a fair bit, or the payment plan you set wasn't set up quite right, whatever it is, that helps them just develop their profiling skills for the next call. And it doesn't ever take the control away from them. I think I'm going to be quite challenged to then change that attribute to be a lifetime outcome. And I think that's where the challenge comes in for us.
In the chemo example, the key is that it's picked up by the AI and therefore notified to the QA team, and then that customer can be recontacted if there is something else that can be done for them. You're right, it shouldn't be derailing the conversation. It's there. And so that's what I mean, to your point, they should just be able to build rapport, have a good conversation, knowing that if they miss something, it's caught, and then there will be a follow-up of some sort afterwards.
Yeah, it's a support tool, right? Yeah. No, it's a great way of putting it.
So throughout today, we talked a bit about regulation, and there's a question here around, does AI need to be regulated? And I know there's talk elsewhere, other jurisdictions. I think there's certainly in the EU, there's the AI regulation that's been talked about. I think even here there was talk about it. I mean, do you think that it does need to be regulated? On how do you think that will come through? Or do you think that's sort of passing as we've got more used to it?
Yes, I think it needs to be regulated.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be, it takes all of us in the room that has, some sort of input from artificial intelligence, no matter how big or how small, to help formulate what that looks like. I think using the FCA sandbox, I think ensuring you're continuing to communicate with regulators is a big one. All of these sorts of aspects are going to help inform that we as an organisation, all of our organisations are still trying to do right by the customer. No one would be in this room if they weren't. You know, why would I, if I thought I knew everything, I wouldn't come because I wouldn't learn anything because I think I'm great. But to be able to come here and, you know, learn from each other and understand those aspects and feed back to the regulators, and that's what's going to then formulate the right outcome for an FCA regulation on AI or a general government policy on it.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're almost at time for this section. I mean, so last question, again, it's the same between all the panels, which is what's going to be new on the horizon in the next 6 months? And this is probably the hardest of all of the panels to predict the next 6 months because it's changing so much, right? So we'll just go along. So, Guy, what's your view for the next 6 months? What will we be talking about in November that will happen in the next 6 months, or what will be bubbling by then?
I think we've talked about it several times. I do think there will be more people trying frontline agent bots because the tech is looking decent, and so far it's been well received. And I know someone else said that earlier, but I do think that is probably the one that is foremost in my mind in this industry. What I'm interested in, though, is actually understanding what's happening in schools. Because as far as I'm aware, there's no AI really being taught properly in schools. And I do think that debate is something that is going on. I know some people in that sector. And I would really like to see AI and the ethics around AI and all that sort of in schools as well. I don't know if anyone else has got any views on that. It's nothing to do with the industry per se, but I do think it's a conversation now and needs resolving quite quickly, because otherwise we're going to have a bit of a strange situation where kids are using AI, all the time outside of education, and yet within education they're not. And obviously, a lot of kids will try and get ChatGPT to write their essays for them and so on. And some teachers are wise to it, others aren't. But it's not so much about that. It's more sort of just generally as an industry, as going into paid work, are kids actually going to be only trained by what they've learnt themselves through a popular yet not amazing tool, when actually the education sector could do a lot more for us ourselves. There's nothing to do with the industry, but it's just something that's front of mind
But
for
in fact,
me.
it's a very, very powerful way of learning bespoke piece of information very quickly if it's right. So, So, Sarah, what's your view on the next 6 months?
I think there'll still be conversations about chatbots because that demand for 24/7 service is there, and it's going to be here to stay. There hasn't really been much talk about virtual assistants. It's quite common in the enforcement sector, something that's been developed and implemented by a lot of firms. So I think we'll start to see that fall over into this sector, and we'll probably be on the cusp of people starting to talk about that really, and how that can help improve customer service and collections.
Okay, fabulous. And then
I think we probably touched on it a minute ago with around regulation. I think that roadmap for how that's going to end up setting out will happen a lot over the remainder of 2025. And I think there's still a lot of kind of tepid people in the room to say, I don't want to use AI and I'm worried about it. And I think if you're using it in the right way, you're going to have to come on the journey at some point. And whether it's for one activity or it's lots of back office functionality, I think people have to get there. So those are the two areas that I think we'll be talking about AI for a while yet.
Yeah. And I suppose there's different flavours of AI as well. That also came up as one of the questions as well. I mean, what is it? But there's actually a lot of different flavours as well. Do you want to?
I just wanted to add there actually, because there's so many flavours of AI, and I've talked about AI quite a lot, and I always do a little bit of research just before, just to check that I'm still on the cusp of what's going on. And there's more terms that are thrown in, and I get confused every time I research it, because I'm like, oh my God, there's something else. So we'll definitely be talking about it for a long time. But one of the things that I did find is that there's a forecast that in 5 years, in 2030, 80% of organisations will be using AI within their day-to-day activities. So I think there's probably a lot of areas that we haven't discussed in terms of the operational side and the automation that will really come to life, that we'll be talking about.
Is it Eric Schmidt, who used to be in charge of Google? There's a TED talk. I was listening on the train on the way up, and he was saying that we're actually under-hyping AI. He doesn't work for Google anymore either. He was actually just some of the things that were the potential of what could be out there in terms of new connections, those kind of things. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much to the panel. So Richard, Sarah, and Guy, thanks very much. So I hope that was interesting for folks. So thanks very much. Give a round of applause.